complete the table of values for y equals a half x minus 1. So what we can see in this table is we've been given the values for x between -2 and 3. So we'll want to substitute these values of x into this equation to work out the values of y. So as you can see, we've been given the value for y when x equals -2, so we can start off with when x equals -1. So we can substitute this value of x in place of the x in the equation. And this tells us that y is equal to a half multiplied by -1 minus 1. So we'll start off by multiplying out the brackets. So a half multiplied by -1 gives us -1/2, and then -1/2 minus 1 tells us that y is equal to -3/2. Next we can move on to when x equals 0. So when x equals 0, y will be equal to a half multiplied by 0 minus 1. Now a half multiplied by 0 is 0, so this means that y is equal to -1. Next we can move on to x equals 1. When x equals 1, y will be equal to a half multiplied by 1 minus 1. A half multiplied by 1 is a half, and then a half minus 1 tells us that y is equal to -1/2. And finally when x equals 3, so y will be equal to a half multiplied by 3 minus 1. So a half multiplied by 3 is 3/2, and then 3/2 minus 1 tells us that y is equal to a half. Now this question's worth 2 marks, and you get both of these marks for correctly filling out the table. On the grid, draw the graph of y equals a half x minus 1 for all of the values of x from -2 to 3. So what we're going to want to do is we'll want to take both the x and y value from this table and then mark that point on this grid. So if we start off with when x equals -2, y equals -2. So we'll want to go -2 from the x-axis and then -2 down the y-axis. And our point should be here. Next we can move on to when x equals -1 and then y equals -3/2. So we'll go -1 on the x-axis and then -1.5 down the y-axis. And we can plot our point here. When x equals 0, y equals -1. So we'll want to go down -1 on the y-axis. And we can plot our point here. When x equals 1, y equals -1/2. So we'll move 1 across on the x-axis and -1/2 down on the y-axis. And as you can see, we're starting to form a straight line. So next we can move on to when x equals 2, y equals 0. So we'll just need to go along 2 on the x-axis. And finally, when x equals 3, y equals 1/2. So we'll go 3 along on the x-axis and 1/2 up on the y-axis. So we've now plotted all 6 coordinates that we need to. However, we'll need to draw a line between these. So using a ruler, we want to draw a straight line through all of these points. And this is the graph of y equals a half x minus 1. And we'll get both marks for correctly completing the graph. Use your graph to find the value of x when y equals 0.3. So what we'll want to do for this question is we'll want to look at the y-axis. So 0.3 on the y-axis is here. And what we can do is we can draw a line parallel to the x-axis. And as we can see, the point in which this line meets our line that we drew is at the point when x equals 2.6. So our x coordinate when y equals 0.3 is 2.6.